The wind on Dust Ridge carried ghosts. Garrett Holloway had learned to hear them in the 18 years since he'd stopped being a doctor and started being a ghost himself. The red sand whispered across the broken hull of the cargo freighter like voices he'd spent 2 decades trying not to remember. His boots crunched against rust and stone as he approached the wreck. The ship had been here long enough for the desert to claim it, metal bones picked clean by scavengers, solar panels stripped, anything valuable long gone. He was only here because the salvage grid said the reactor core might still hold a charge. He wasn't here to save anyone. Those days were dead, buried 18 years deep in a grave he'd never been allowed to visit. The hull breach gaped like a wound in the ship's side. Heat rolled out in waves that made the air shimmer, mixing with the sharp chemical smell of degraded coolant and something else, something organic, something wrong. Garrett's hand moved to the medical scanner on his belt before he could stop himself. Old habits, the kind that got you killed out here where hope was a currency no one could afford. But his fingers found the scanner anyway. The reading made him stop cold. 5 life signs: faint, fading, human adjacent but not quite, elevated core temperatures, cardiac rhythms failing, blood pressure dropping into critical ranges, dying. He should have turned around, should have climbed back into his ground hauler and driven away, should have done what he'd done for 18 years, survived by staying invisible, by never getting involved, by remembering that the last time he'd tried to save someone, he'd lost everything. But something in those readings looked like numbers he'd seen before, in a colonial medical bay, in the final hours of a life he couldn't save no matter how hard he'd tried. Garrett tightened his grip on the medical scanner and stepped through the breach. The cargo bay swallowed him in darkness and heat. Emergency strips still glowed weakly along the floor, casting everything in sickly amber. The air tasted like metal and desperation. Then he saw them. 5 figures hung suspended from the ceiling beams, inverted, their ankles locked in gravity restraints that pulsed with dying energy. Their hair dragged across the deck, plaiting long and tangled with dust and dried blood. Their skin had taken on the mottled, darkened appearance of prolonged inversion veins, standing out like bruises across their faces and arms. They were alien, unmistakably so. Their features were too delicate, too symmetrical, their proportions slightly wrong in ways that marked them as other. But close enough to human that looking at them hurt in places Garrett had thought were numb. Close enough that he could see they were young. Close enough that he could see they were dying. The smallest one twitched, weakly fingers spasming in a rhythm that suggested neurological damage. Another hung completely limp, head lolling, chest barely rising. The one in the center let out a sound, something between a whimper and a sigh, before consciousness slipped away again. Garrett's jaw locked so hard his teeth ached. Then the eldest moved. She lifted her head with an effort that clearly cost her everything she had left. Blood rushed to her face, darkening features already flushed from hours, maybe days of inversion. But her eyes, large and luminous and utterly alien, found his through the gloom. Not with hope, with calculation born from absolute desperation. "Please." Her voice was fractured, raw from screaming that no one had answered. "Please save my sisters." Her gaze flickered to the others hanging beside her. When she looked back at Garrett, something inside her broke, some final wall between dignity and survival. "I will bond with you," she whispered. "I will carry your seed every cycle, every year. I will give you anything you want." Her breath shuddered in her chest. "Just don't let them die." The words hung in the superheated air like an execution. Garrett did not answer, did not move, did not allow his face to show anything at all. For a long moment there was only the hum of failing systems and the faint, ragged breathing of 5 beings who had been left to die slowly in the dark. Then another voice, weaker, younger, joined the first. "Please, sir. Please, we'll be good. We'll do whatever you say." And another, "I can cook, I can clean. I won't complain. Just please." Wow. The fourth barely managed a whisper. "Don't leave us here." The youngest, the smallest one, the one whose fingers had been twitching, tried to lift her head. Failed. Tried again. Her voice came out as little more than breath. "I don't want to die." 5 desperate pleas. 5 young women offering the only currency they'd been taught they possessed. 5 lives hanging in the balance while a man who'd sworn off saving people 18 years ago stood frozen in the half-light. Garrett's hand moved to his belt. The soft whine of an energy blade igniting cut through the silence like a scalpel through skin. The eldest alien flinched, squeezed her eyes shut, braced herself for whatever bargain she believed she just sealed, whatever price was about to be extracted from flesh that had nothing left to give. The blade never came near her body. Instead, Garrett stepped forward and sliced cleanly through the first gravity restraint. The field collapsed with a hiss of discharged energy. The smallest one dropped limp as a doll. Garrett moved faster than his 47 years, and failing heart should have allowed catching her before she hit the deck. Her weight was almost nothing in his arms, light in a way that terrified him. He lowered her gently to the floor, positioning her on her side so the blood rushing back to her brain wouldn't cause a stroke. Then he was already moving to the next restraint. One by one, he cut them down. The second sister cried out weakly as circulation returned to her limbs, pain and life flooding back together in equal measure. The third barely made a sound at all, unconscious before he'd even finished lowering her down. By the time Garrett reached the eldest, sweat ran down his spine in rivers. His environmental suit chimed warnings he couldn't hear over the thunder of his own pulse. Heat exhaustion, cardiac stress, warnings he'd ignored for years. He cut the final restraint and caught her as she fell, her body trembling violently as gravity reclaimed her. She was heavier than the others, older muscles more developed. She grabbed at his suit instinctively, fingers scrabbling for purchase as the world spun. "You're safe," Garrett said. His voice came out rougher than he'd intended, scraped raw by heat and something he refused to name. "No one is dying here today." He laid her beside her sisters in the narrow strip of shade cast by the open breach. Only then did he pause long enough to look at them properly. Not as objects, not as property, not as problems or complications or mistakes, as living beings pulled back from the edge of something unforgivable. The eldest struggled to speak again, shame burning hotter than the pain radiating through her spine and shoulders. "What I said, I meant it. I wasn't—" "Forget it," Garrett interrupted. She froze. "You said what you had to say to save them." He continued, not looking at her as he began running medical scans. "That doesn't bind you to anything." She stared at him, eyes wide with incomprehension. "No one here pays with their body to live," Garrett said flatly. "Not with me." Silence fell over the cargo bay like a held breath. 5 alien women who had grown up believing that survival always came with a price, that their bodies were currency, that men only helped when they wanted something in return, lay there in the half-light, listening to a truth they had never been allowed to imagine. Garrett moved among them without hesitation, checking pulses, activating emergency water rations from his kit, shielding their faces from the worst of the heat with a solar tarp he'd brought for salvage. And never, not once, did his eyes look at them the way they'd learned to expect. For the eldest sister, still shaking on the metal deck, with her head spinning and her heart hammering against her ribs, that realization hurt more than the restraints ever had. Because for the first time in her life, a man had come not to take something from her, but to give something back. The next hours blurred together in a haze of medical necessity and stubborn survival. Garrett made 3 trips to his ground hauler, carrying each of the sisters, one at a time, through the killing heat of Dust Ridge's afternoon. His suit's cooling system had long since given up. His vision swam at the edges, dark spots blooming and fading with each step. The medical scanner on his belt screamed warnings he'd learned to ignore. Dehydration, heat stroke, cardiac arrhythmia. He ignored them all. The youngest weighed almost nothing in his arms. Her body was fever-hot muscles trembling with the effort of simply existing. He felt her heart beat against his chest, too fast, too weak, struggling to maintain pressure in a body that had been inverted for far too long. He laid her down first inside his hauler's cargo section, where a portable cooling unit hummed to life, and began dropping the temperature degree by precious degree. Then he went back for the others. By the time he carried the eldest inside, the world had narrowed to a tunnel. His hands shook. His breathing came in short, sharp gasps that his lungs couldn't quite satisfy. The pain in his chest had graduated from warning to threat, but all 5 were finally inside, finally safe. Only when the hauler's hatch sealed and the environmental systems kicked into full operation did Garrett allow himself to stop. He knelt between them, pulling water rations from emergency stores he'd been hoarding for years. He poured small amounts into his palm, letting it drip gently onto their lips. Not too much, not too fast. He'd learned that lesson in another life in colonial field hospitals, where resources were scarce and mistakes were measured in body counts. Too much water too quickly, and a body already pushed to its limits could fail completely. The youngest stirred first. Her fingers closed weakly around his wrist as she swallowed a few drops, instinct overriding consciousness. 2 others gasped suddenly, air tearing back into their lungs, like swimmers breaking the surface after being held under too long. One remained unconscious, her chest rising, shallowly, stubbornly, but rising nonetheless. The eldest watched him through half-lidded eyes. Her name was Ashara, though he did not know it yet. Her long dark hair lay tangled across the deck plating like spilled ink. Her skin still carried the flushed, bruised appearance of prolonged inversion veins standing out darkly against her temples and throat. Pain throbbed through her shoulders and spine with every breath. But she did not look away from him. Not because she wanted something, because she didn't understand him. Garrett moved with quiet efficiency, the kind born from years of practice in places where hesitation meant death. He cleaned cuts with antiseptic foam that hissed against damaged skin. He wrapped swollen joints in compression bandages. He checked each heartbeat with the precision of someone who'd once cared deeply about the difference between life and death. His hands were rough scarred from years of salvage work and survival. Unmistakably human, but never careless. When Ashara finally found her voice again, it came out barely louder than a breath. "What I said back there." Garrett shook his head without looking up from the bandage he was securing around her ankle. "You don't need to explain." "But I meant it," she whispered, shame creeping into her tone like poison. "I wasn't lying. If that's what you want—" "I know," Garrett said calmly, cutting her off. "That doesn't make it your obligation." The words hit her harder than the gravity restraints ever had. She had grown up learning that survival always came with a cost, a debt, a promise that was never really a choice. Men of many species had always looked at her and her sisters like something to be claimed, to be owned, to be used if the price was right. This human looked at her like she was injured, like that was the only thing that mattered. Garrett finished securing the cooling wrap around her shoulders and stood, joints protesting the movement. "Rest," he said simply. "All of you, sleep if you can." Sleep took them in fragments. When Ashara woke again, the harsh emergency lighting had been replaced by a softer amber glow. The temperature had dropped to something almost comfortable. The air no longer tasted like metal and desperation. The human sat nearby, his back against a storage crate, cleaning dried blood from his hands with methodical care. He'd removed the outer layers of his environmental suit, revealing skin, weathered by radiation and years of hard living under unforgiving suns. She realized something then that made her chest tighten. He was not young. Lines cut his face deeply, not from cruelty, but from time and loss and survival. Gray threaded through his hair at the temples. His hands, for all their steadiness, bore the subtle tremor of age and strain. This was not a man chasing conquest or collecting trophies. This was a man who had already buried something precious and learned what it meant to carry the weight of it. The others stirred slowly over the next hours. Soft voices, confusion, fear that wouldn't quite let go even in the presence of safety. The human answered their questions simply, without impatience or irritation, without the edge of possession that they'd learned to listen for. "You're safe. No, you're not being tracked. Not yet. Yes, you can stay until you're strong enough. No, I don't want anything from you." At one point, Ashara tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her back like fire, sharp enough to steal her breath. She froze, gasping, humiliated by her own weakness. The human was at her side instantly, one hand steady against her shoulder. "Easy," he said. "Your body needs time. You were inverted for at least 48 hours, maybe more. The damage doesn't heal in minutes." She swallowed against the tightness in her throat. "Why are you doing this?" He paused, considering the question as if it deserved a real answer. As if she deserved a real answer. "Because leaving you there would have been wrong." That was all. No speeches, no expectations, no demands for gratitude or payment or anything at all. Later, when the others had fallen into exhausted sleep and the hauler's systems hummed softly in the background, Ashara spoke quietly into the dimness. "In my world, kindness like this is never free." The human looked at her, then something in his eyes softening in a way that made him look even older, even more tired. "Then your world is poorer than it should be." She felt heat gather behind her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She turned her face away before he could see it, before she had to acknowledge what it meant. For the first time since she was a child, a man had saved her without taking anything. And that terrified her more than the restraints ever had, because it meant she no longer knew what she owed. And for the first time in her life, the answer might be nothing at all. 3 days passed beneath Dust Ridge's broken sky. The cargo hauler became quieter with each passing hour, as if the metal walls themselves were learning to breathe again. The younger sisters recovered, first youth and resilience working in their favor. Ren, the curious one, could stand without shaking now. She'd started asking questions about everything, pointing at equipment and supplies with wide eyes, drinking in information like someone who'd been starved for it. She laughed softly when she spilled water on herself, surprised by the sound of her own voice. The fact that laughter was possible, that joy could exist without permission. Liz, the gentle one, had taken to sketching on scraps of packing material, her fingers moving in patterns that suggested muscle memory art that had been suppressed but never destroyed. Even Nix, the stubborn one, who'd spent the first day radiating hostility and suspicion, had started to relax, started to believe that maybe impossibly this human meant what he said. Only Kaida, the youngest, remained fragile. She could sit up now, could drink water without assistance, but something in her eyes stayed distant, haunted, as if part of her was still hanging in that cargo bay, still waiting for someone to cut her down. Ashera watched her youngest sister with growing concern, and she watched the human with growing confusion. Garrett had told them his name on the second day, just that. Garrett. No family name, no history, no explanation of why a man his age lived alone in the wasteland, salvaging wrecks and avoiding civilization. But Ashara was learning to read the things he didn't say. The way his hands shook slightly when he thought no one was looking. The way he sometimes pressed a palm to his chest as if checking his own heartbeat. The medication dispenser on his belt that he accessed twice daily with the automatic movement of long habit. The way he looked at Kaida, sometimes something breaking behind his eyes before he turned away. On the third evening, ember light spilled through the hauler's viewport in thin ribbons, painting dust motes gold. Ashara found Garrett running diagnostics on his medical scanner, muttering under his breath at failing components. She sat down across from him, moving slowly, careful of her still healing back. "You have questions," he said without looking up. "Many. I might not answer them. I know." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I need to ask anyway. Why do you live out here alone? Why do you carry medical equipment if you're a salvager? Why do you look at my youngest sister like she reminds you of someone you lost?" Garrett's hands stilled on the scanner. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't acknowledge the question at all. Then slowly, he set the scanner aside. 18 years ago, I was a doctor, colonial frontier medicine. My wife was a researcher, xenobiology. We had a daughter, 2 years old. Her name was Maya. Ashara felt her breath catch. There was an accident, or that's what they told me. His voice remained flat, clinical, as if he was describing someone else's tragedy. Transport shuttle malfunction. All passengers lost. No survivors. No bodies recovered. "I'm sorry," Ashara whispered. "I stopped being a doctor after that. Couldn't save them, couldn't see the point in saving anyone else. Came out here where the only thing that matters is whether your equipment works and whether you're smart enough to avoid getting killed." He finally looked at her, and the emptiness in his eyes was worse than anger would have been. "Your sister, Kaida, she's about the age Maya would be now, if she'd lived." Understanding settled over Ashara like a weight. "That's why you saved us." "Maybe, or maybe I'm just tired of letting people die when I could do something about it." He picked up the scanner, again fingers moving over it without purpose. "Doesn't matter why. You're safe, that's all that matters." But it did matter, Ashara realized. It mattered because this man had been broken 18 years ago, and he'd still chosen to put himself back together long enough to save 5 strangers who'd offered him everything and received only kindness in return. She reached out slowly, carefully, and placed her hand over his. He flinched. Not away, but into stillness, as if touch had become foreign to him. "Thank you," she said simply, "for giving us back our lives. You don't owe me gratitude." "I know. That's why I'm giving it freely." Something shifted in his expression then. Something old and painful and almost like hope. But before either of them could speak again, the hauler's proximity alarm began to scream. Garrett was on his feet instantly, all softness gone, replaced by sharp focus. He moved to the console, fingers flying over controls as data streamed across screens. 3 ships, he said, voice tight. "Incoming fast, military-grade engines, armed." Ashara felt ice flood her veins. "They found us. The contract holders. They always find us." Her voice shook despite her best efforts. "We're chipped, tracked. We belong to them until the debt is paid, and the debt is designed never to be paid." Garrett's jaw locked. "Show me." Ashara pulled aside the cooling wrap on her shoulder, revealing a small node embedded beneath the skin. Standard contract chip, biocoded, designed to broadcast location, vital signs, even emotional state to anyone who owned the frequency. "All of you?" Garrett asked. "All of us." He moved to the others, checking quickly, finding the same chips in the same location. 5 tracking devices. 5 chains they couldn't remove without surgical equipment and anesthetic they didn't have. The proximity alarm shrieked louder. 2 minutes to contact. Garrett's hands moved over the console with the kind of speed that spoke of muscle memory, of skills he'd claimed to have abandoned, but clearly hadn't forgotten. He pulled up scanner readings, analyzed the incoming ships, calculated vectors and weapons loads. Then he stopped, went completely still. Ashara saw his face drain of color. What? What is it? Garrett's finger traced one line of data on the screen. Biosignature analysis. Genetic markers pulled from the contract chip's medical monitoring systems. 4 chips showed standard alien DNA patterns, unique to each sister but with unexpected parameters. The 5th chip embedded in Kaita's shoulder showed something else, something impossible. Garrett pulled up a secondary screen, hands shaking, now no longer bothering to hide it. He accessed files he'd thought he'd deleted years ago. Medical records from another life. DNA sequences he'd memorized because they were all he had left. He overlaid them against Kaita's genetic signature. The match was perfect. Not similar, not close. Perfect. 99.7% genetic identity to a human child who had died 18 years ago in a shuttle accident that wasn't an accident at all. Garrett turned slowly to look at Keikita, where she sat with her sisters, young and frightened, and completely unaware that she was impossible. No, he whispered. But the data didn't lie. Kaita wasn't just similar to his daughter. She was his daughter. A clone, created from DNA that should have been lost 18 years ago in flames and vacuum and lies. The proximity alarm hit 0. Outside, 3 ships dropped from the sky like birds of prey. And Garrett Holloway, who'd thought he'd buried his daughter 18 years ago, realized with absolute clarity that he'd been burying the wrong thing all along. He should have been burying the people who'd taken her. His hands moved to the weapons locker. If they wanted to take his daughter again, they'd have to go through him first. And this time he wasn't running. The first ship touched down 50 meters from the hauler thrusters, scorching the red sand into glass. The second and third landed in formation, creating a triangle of metal in threat that left no escape vector uncovered. Garrett's hands moved over the weapons locker with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from a life he'd thought he'd left behind. Plasma rifle, charge pack, secondary sidearm. Not much against military-grade ships, but enough to make a statement, enough to die trying. Behind him, the sisters had gone silent. That particular silence that came from recognition, from knowing exactly what was about to happen, because it had happened before, because it always happened. Only this time something was different. This time they had Garrett Holloway between them and the door. And Garrett Holloway had just discovered that the youngest girl he'd saved wasn't a stranger at all. She was his daughter, stolen and remade and sold. His hands didn't shake as he checked the rifle's charge. They'd gone past shaking into something colder, something surgical. "Stay back," he said quietly. "All of you, away from the viewports." "They'll kill you," Ashara whispered. "Maybe. They have legal claim, contracts. The system protects them, not us." Garrett looked at her then, and something in his eyes made her step back. Not fear? Recognition. She was seeing the man he'd been before loss had hollowed him out, before 18 years of running had taught him that survival meant staying invisible. "The system," he said softly, "can burn." The hauler's external comm crackled to life. A voice smooth and cultured and utterly without warmth filled the cabin. "Occupant of salvage vessel K-72. This is Captain Draven Vex of the Merchant Guild Enforcement Division. You are currently in possession of 5 bonded assets that represent significant financial investment. Surrender them immediately and you will not be harmed." Garrett didn't touch the comm. "I will give you 60 seconds to comply," the voice continued, "after which we will employ necessary force to recover our property." Ashara moved to stand beside Garrett despite his warning. "He means it. They have legal authority, contracts signed and witnessed. We belong to them until the debt is cleared." "How much?" "What? The debt." "How much?" She laughed, a broken sound. "More than we could earn in 5 lifetimes. That's the design. Work until you're used up, then they sell you to someone else. The debt transfers. It never ends." Garrett's finger hovered over the comm button. "And if someone paid it?" "No one would. The price is set to be impossible." "That's not what I asked." Outside, armored figures emerged from the ships. 12 of them. Military-grade exoskeletons. Weapons that could punch through the hauler's hull like paper. 30 seconds. Garrett pressed the comm. "This is Garrett Holloway. The women you're looking for are under my protection. They're not going anywhere." A pause, then laughter, genuine and amused. "Mr. Holloway, unexpected. I had you flagged as a simple salvager, not a hero. Heroes tend to have very short lifespans out here. I'm offering you a chance to extend yours. Step aside." No. Then you're choosing to die for 5 assets you have no legal claim to. That seems unwise. Garrett looked at Kaida, still sitting with her sisters, her face pale and frightened and heartbreakingly familiar. 17 years old, his daughter's DNA, his daughter's existence stolen and commodified. They're not assets, he said into the comm. They're people. According to a frontier contract law, they are both, and the law is very clear about property rights. Then the law is wrong. Another pause, longer this time. When Draven Vex spoke again, something had shifted in his tone. Curiosity replacing amusement. You're serious. You're actually prepared to die for this, if that's what it takes. Fascinating. Very well, Mr. Holloway. Since you seem determined to make this interesting, I'll come aboard. Alone. Unarmed. We'll discuss this like civilized beings. If you shoot me, my people have orders to level this entire grid square. But I suspect you won't. You have the sound of a man who still believes in things like honor and conversation. The comm clicked off. Ashara grabbed Garrett's arm. It's a trap. He'll say anything to get inside, and once he does, I know. Garrett lowered the rifle but didn't set it aside. But he's right about one thing. If we fight now, we all die. I need to hear what he's offering. I need to understand what we're up against. You can't negotiate with people like him. I'm not negotiating. I'm buying time. The hauler's hatch cycled open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. A figure stepped through, ducking slightly to clear the frame. Draven Vex was tall, slender, dressed in clothing that cost more than Garrett's entire salvage operation. His face was sharp, almost predatory, with eyes that cataloged everything in a single sweep. No weapons visible, but the kind of man who didn't need weapons because he had 12 armed soldiers outside. He smiled. Mr. Holloway, thank you for your hospitality. His gaze moved past Garrett to the 5 sisters huddled together. And there they are, all 5, undamaged, I hope. They were dying when I found them, Garrett said flatly, hung upside down in a cargo bay, left to suffocate. Draven's expression didn't change. Unfortunate. Transportation arrangements fell through. These things happen in frontier logistics. But they're alive now, thanks to you. The Guild appreciates your intervention. We'll compensate you fairly for your time and medical supplies. They're not for sale. Everything is for sale, Mr. Holloway. It's simply a matter of price. Draven pulled a data slate from his jacket, movements careful and visible. These 5 represent a combined contract value of 2 million credits. Significant investment, training, medical optimization, gene therapy to enhance appeal and fertility. Years of preparation. Garrett felt something cold settle in his stomach. Gene therapy. Of course, the exotic market has very specific preferences. Natural genetics are rarely sufficient. Draven swiped through screens. We acquired base genetic material from various sources, applied modifications, grew them in controlled environments. The result is premium product, unique, valuable. You're describing slavery. I'm describing legal contract labor. They signed agreements. Upon maturation, standard practice. They were children. They were assets reaching operational age. Draven's smile never wavered. Mr. Holloway, I understand this may seem harsh to someone unfamiliar with frontier economics, but these 5 have been given lives they would never have had otherwise. Fed, clothed, educated. In exchange, they fulfill their contractual obligations. It's quite fair. Ashara's voice cut through sharp with barely controlled rage. We were grown in tanks, sold before we could speak, taught that our only value was in our bodies. That's not life. That's manufacturing. Draven looked at her with the kind of patience reserved for explaining simple concepts to children. You were given consciousness, purpose. That's more than most beings in this galaxy can claim. He turned back to Garrett. Now, let's discuss terms. I'm prepared to offer you a finder's fee, 50,000 credits for their return undamaged. You walk away wealthy. They fulfill their contracts. Everyone benefits. No. 100,000. No. Draven's smile thinned. You're trying my patience, Mr. Holloway. You cannot win this. I have 12 armed soldiers outside. I have legal authority. I have resources you cannot begin to imagine. What exactly do you think you're protecting them from? Garrett met his gaze without blinking. From you. I own them. You own papers. You don't own people. The law disagrees. Then I'll break the law. For the first time, something like genuine emotion crossed Draven's face. Irritation quickly controlled. Very well, since you insist on being difficult. He tapped the data slate. According to contract law, Bonded assets can be released through debt satisfaction. The combined debt for these five is 2.3 million credits. Can you pay that, Mr. Holloway? The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Garrett had maybe 15,000 in savings. Everything he owned wouldn't cover 1%. I didn't think so. Draven slid the slate back into his jacket. This conversation is over. You have 10 minutes to say your goodbyes. Then they come with me. No. Then you die, along with them. My patience has limits. Garrett raised the rifle. Draven didn't even flinch. Shoot me and you prove that might makes right. That the strong can simply take what they want from the weak. Is that the world you want, Mr. Holloway? Because that's my world. And I'm very good at it. The silence stretched. Then Ashara stepped forward. There's another way, she said quietly. Both men looked at her. Contract law allows for transfer of ownership through bonding. Marriage. If one of us bonded with a free citizen, the contract transfers to them, along with the debt. Draven's eyebrows rose. Technically true, though I fail to see how that helps you. Mr. Holloway would then owe 2.3 million credits, and I would simply pursue collection through legal channels, seize his assets, garnish any income, ultimately repossess you anyway when he inevitably defaults. Unless the bond is registered before the debt is formally transferred, then it becomes a civil matter, not a commercial one. Different courts, different jurisdiction, it could take years to resolve. Years during which you remain free, Draven said, slowly, understanding dawning. Clever, I'm impressed. There's intelligence in that pretty head after all. Ashara ignored the barb. She turned to Garrett and he saw in her eyes what she was about to do. No, he said immediately. It's the only way. You're not trading one prison for another. I'm not, I'm choosing. She moved closer, voice dropping, so only he could hear. You saved us expecting nothing. Let me save us by giving you something freely. A legal bond, a partnership, not because I'm desperate or afraid or trying to pay a debt, because it's the right move. Ashara, I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to want this. I'm asking you to let me use the only tool they left us. Their own broken system. Garrett looked at her, seeing the calculation behind her eyes, the strategic mind working through scenarios like a general planning a battle. She wasn't pleading. She was proposing an alliance. And he hated that she'd been forced to think this way. That survival had taught her to weaponize herself. This isn't right, he said. Neither was leaving us to die. You did it anyway. Draven watched the exchange with growing amusement. How touching, but ultimately pointless. Even if you bond with her, Mr. Holloway, the debt remains. And I have decades of experience extracting payment from reluctant debtors. You'll break. Everyone breaks. Maybe, Garrett said, but not today. He lowered the rifle. Draven's smile returned. Does that mean? It means I need time to think. You said 10 minutes. I'm taking them. Of course. Though I should mention, Draven moved toward the hatch, pausing at the threshold. There's something else you should know about your new friends, Mr. Holloway. Something about where they came from, where their genetics came from. Garrett's blood went cold. We don't acquire DNA randomly. Too unpredictable. We prefer verified sources. Premium genetics from individuals who display desirable traits. Intelligence, health, aesthetic appeal. Draven's eyes found Kaida. The youngest one, for instance. Beautiful specimen. Identical genetics to a colonial researcher who died 18 years ago. Elena Holloway. I believe that was your wife's name, wasn't it? The world stopped. Garrett couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what he was hearing. We acquired her remains from the shuttle wreckage, harvested viable genetic material before disposal, created 3 units from her DNA over the years. This is the most recent. The other 2 were sold to private collectors. Draven tilted his head. You didn't know. Of course you didn't. The official story was complete incineration. No survivors, no remains. Clean paperwork. Garrett's voice came out as a whisper. You're lying. I have documentation. The Guild keeps meticulous records. Your wife wasn't killed in an accident, Mr. Holloway. She was killed because someone wanted her genetics. Because someone was willing to pay for the privilege of owning copies of her. He paused. And her daughter, little Maya, also harvested, also sold. She'd be about 20 now, serving out her contract somewhere in the outer sectors. The hauler spun. Garrett's legs gave out. He caught himself against a bulkhead, pulse hammering in his ears, vision tunneling. 18 years. 18 years of grief and guilt and believing he'd failed to save them. But they hadn't died in an accident. They'd been murdered, harvested, turned into product. And Kaida sitting there with her frightened eyes and her familiar face wasn't his daughter. She was his daughter's genetics worn by a stranger who'd been grown in a tank and sold before she could speak. I apologize for the shock, Draven said, not sounding apologetic at all. But you needed to understand what you're dealing with. This isn't some simple slavery operation you can dismantle with righteous anger. This is a multi-billion credit industry with connections in every sector. We own judges, governors, military commanders. You cannot fight us. He stepped through the hatch. 10 minutes, Mr. Holloway. Then I take back what's mine. The hatch sealed. Silence crashed over the hauler like a wave. Garrett couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at Kaida and see Elena's eyes looking back at him through the face of a girl who'd never known his wife, never known Maya, never known anything but servitude. Ashara knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. They killed her. His voice sounded distant, detached, like it belonged to someone else. They killed them both. For this. For money. Yes. And Maya's still alive. Somewhere. Still in chains. Maybe, if what he said is true. Garrett looked at her, and she flinched from what she saw in his eyes. It's true. Men like that don't lie when the truth cuts deeper. He stood slowly, joints protesting, heart hammering against ribs that suddenly felt too tight. 18 years. I thought I was mourning the dead, but they weren't dead. They were being used. The other sisters had gathered close, watching him with growing fear. They'd seen this before he realized. Seen men break from revelation, seen rage turn to violence. But Garrett's hands didn't shake. His voice didn't rise. He simply walked to the weapons locker and began loading equipment with methodical care. What are you doing? Ashara asked. Getting ready. For what? To break the law. He checked a charge pack, slotted it home. To break the system that let this happen. To break every single person who profited from murdering my family and turning them into commodities. You can't fight the entire guild. No, but I can start. Nix, the stubborn one who'd spent days radiating hostility, spoke for the first time since the ships had landed. He'll kill you. All of us. Probably. Then why? Garrett looked at her. At all of them. 5 young women who'd been manufactured, modified, and sold. 5 lives that should never have existed in the form they did but existed nonetheless. 5 people who deserve better than what the galaxy had given them. Because someone has to, he said simply. Because if not me, then who? If not now, then when? He loaded the last weapon. Because my daughter is still out there somewhere being used and I let her down once. I won't do it again. Kaida made a small sound, something between a punk and a gasp. Garrett moved to her, kneeling so they were eye level. Up close, the resemblance to Elena was devastating. But there were differences, too, the shape of her jaw, the set of her eyes. She wasn't Elena, wasn't Maya. She was herself, unique and irreplaceable despite what her genetics said. You didn't ask to be created this way, he said gently. You didn't ask to carry DNA that isn't yours by right. But you're here anyway. You exist, and that means you matter. Tears ran down her face. I'm sorry I remind you of them. Don't be. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His hand settled on her shoulder, warm and steady. You're not a replacement. You're not a copy. You're Kaida. And Kaida deserves to be free. He stood looking at all 5 of them. I can't promise I'll win. I can't promise we'll survive. But I can promise I won't let them take you without a fight. He paused. Ashara's right about one thing. The bond could buy us time. Legal complications they'd have to navigate. It's not freedom, but it's a chance. Ashara stood as well. Then we do it, now, before the time runs out. You don't understand what you're offering. The debt transfers to me, yes, but so does the responsibility. You'd be legally bound to me, subject to my decisions. It's just another form of ownership. Only if you make it that. She moved closer, her gaze steady. I've watched you for 3 days. You don't see us as property. You see us as people. That's the difference. That's why this works. I'm 47 years old. I'm dying slowly from a heart condition I can't afford to treat. I have nothing to offer you except a prolonged legal battle and probable death. And I'm a manufactured person with no legal rights, no home, and no future except servitude. We're a matched pair. She held out her hand. Partners. Garrett looked at her hand, at the woman who'd been created in a tank optimized for someone else's pleasure, taught that her body was the only currency she possessed, who was now offering that body as a shield for her sisters, who was choosing despite everything to trust him. He took her hand. Partners. The ceremony was brief, conducted through the hauler's legal interface. Frontier contract law allowed for emergency bonding with minimal documentation. 2 witnesses. Verbal consent. Biometric confirmation. Liss and Wren served as witnesses, hands shaking as they pressed their marks to the digital registry. Garrett and Ashera stood facing each other in the cramped cabin, surrounded by weapons and supplies, and the smell of fear. "Do you, Garrett Holloway, accept this bond freely and without coercion?" the automated system asked. "I do." "Do you, Ashera of the Kayla line, accept this bond freely and without coercion?" "I do." Bond registered. Legal partnership established. All assets and debts now shared between bonded parties. That was all. No ceremony, no celebration. Just a legal filing that shifted debt from one column to another and bought them time measured in weeks, maybe months, before Draven's lawyers tore through the protections. But time was something. Time was hope. The hatch cycled open. Draven stepped through, checking a chronometer. "Your time is—" He stopped, seeing their faces. "Ah, you actually did it. Remarkable." "The bond is registered," Garrett said. "The debt is now a civil matter. You'll have to go through proper channels." "Which I will." With great enthusiasm. Draven's smile was back. "But I must admit I'm impressed. You've bought yourselves perhaps 6 months before the courts rule in my favor. Possibly a year if you find a particularly incompetent judge. A lot can happen in a year. Indeed, you could run, hide in the deep frontier. I'd find you eventually, but it would take time, effort, expense." Draven moved closer. "Or you could consider an alternative." "I'm listening." "Work for me." The words hung in the air like poison. "You have skills, Mr. Holloway. Medical training, salvage expertise, the ability to make difficult decisions under pressure. I could use someone like you. And in exchange, I could forgive the debt, all of it. The 5 of them go free. You earn good money. Everyone wins." Garrett stared at him. "You want me to help you do to others what you did to my family. I want you to accept reality. This industry exists because there's demand. If not me, someone else will fill the role. At least I run a clean operation. Humane conditions, regular medical care. Many operations are far worse. That's not the defense you think it is." Draven shrugged. "Consider it. You have time now. Use it wisely." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Holloway, your daughter, Maya. I wasn't lying about her. I can find her if you'd like. For a price. Everything has a price." He was gone before Garrett could respond. The hatch sealed. Outside, the ships lifted off thrusters, scorching the sand as they climbed into the darkening sky. Silence returned. Garrett stood in the center of the hauler, legally bonded to a woman he barely knew, responsible for 5 lives he couldn't protect, and carrying the knowledge that his daughter was alive somewhere in chains. Ashera moved to his side. "We should run. Get as far from here as possible." "Running won't help. He'll find us." "Then what do we do?" Garrett looked at her, at the others. At Kaida, who carried his wife's DNA and his daughter's ghost. And he thought about 18 years of hiding, of surviving by staying invisible, of letting the galaxy be cruel because fighting back was too dangerous. He was done hiding. "We fight," he said quietly, "not with guns, with information, evidence, exposure. We find out who's buying these contracts, who's profiting. We make it too expensive to continue. That could take years, decades. Then we have work to do." He met her gaze. "You signed on as partners. That offer stands. But you need to know what you're getting into. This isn't freedom. This is war. And wars are rarely won by people like us." Ashera smiled, tired but genuine. "Better a war than a cage." The others nodded one by one. Even Kaida, youngest and most frightened, straightened her shoulders. "What do we do first?" Wren asked. Garrett moved to the console, pulling up files he'd thought he'd never access again. Medical records, transportation logs, communication intercepts from his years working colonial salvage. "First, we learn everything we can about the Guild, their operations, their clients, their weak points. And then Wama. Then we burn it down." Outside, the sun set over Dust Ridge, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Inside the hauler, 6 people who'd been broken by the galaxy's cruelty began the long, dangerous work of breaking back. And somewhere in the deep frontier, a girl with Maya Holloway's DNA served out a contract she'd never signed, unaware that her father had finally stopped running, unaware that he was coming. The war had begun. 6 months changed everything. The hauler became a command center. Garrett had converted the cargo bay into a makeshift research station, screens covering every surface, data streaming in from sources he'd cultivated over years of frontier salvage. Shipping manifests, contract registries, medical records that shouldn't exist but did. The sisters worked beside him, each finding their role in the war they'd declared. Ashura had a mind for patterns, for connecting dots that seemed unrelated until she laid them out in sequence. She tracked money flows, shell companies, the invisible networks that move product and profit across the frontier. Nix turned her stubbornness into determination, learning security systems and encryption with the focus of someone who'd spent years looking for weaknesses in cages. She cracked databases that were supposed to be impenetrable. Lists drew maps, visual representations of the guild's operations that made the abstract concrete. Her artistic eye found connections in spatial relationships that pure data missed. Ren asked questions, endless questions, probing every assumption until they found the flaws. She became their devil's advocate, their safety net against mistakes. And Kaeda, youngest and most damaged, learned to speak. Not just words, but testimony. She documented everything she remembered, every detail of the facility where she'd been grown, the training, the preparation, the moment she'd realized she was property. Her voice would matter. Garrett made sure she knew that. The work consumed them. 18-hour days, meals eaten at screens, sleep taken in shifts. They moved the hauler twice, staying ahead of trackers they knew were looking, keeping to the deep frontier where authority was thin and questions were expensive. But slowly, methodically, they built their case. Evidence of murders disguised as accidents. DNA harvesting from unwilling sources. Contract fraud on a scale that touched thousands of lives across dozens of systems. Names of buyers, politicians, corporate executives who'd purchased human beings like furniture. And at the center of it all, Draven Vex and his guild. Garrett worked with a focus that surprised even him. The heart condition that had been killing him slowly seemed to pause, as if his body had decided it could wait until this was finished. The medication helped. The sense of purpose helped more. For 18 years, he'd been dying. Now he had a reason to live. Ashura watched him late one night, the blue glow of the screens casting shadows across his face. He'd aged in the months since the rescue, the lines cutting deeper, their gray spreading further. But something else had changed too. The emptiness that had lived behind his eyes was gone, replaced by determination. "You should rest," she said quietly. "Almost done with this section." "You said that 3 hours ago." He glanced up, managed a tired smile. "Did I?" She moved closer, placed a hand on his shoulder. The gesture had become familiar over the months, this casual touch that meant nothing and everything. Partners checking on each other, allies ensuring mutual survival. Nothing more, except sometimes it felt like more. "Garrett, you're going to collapse if you don't sleep." "I've collapsed before. I'm still here." That's not inspiring confidence. He saved his work, stood slowly, joints protesting. They were alone in the command center. The others had finally given in to exhaustion hours ago. "We're close," he said. "Another week, maybe 2, and we'll have enough to go public. Real media. Legitimate journalists who can't be bought. And then we watch it burn." Ashura studied his face in the dim light. "And after that? After the guild falls, and Draven is arrested, and the contracts are voided. What happens to us?" The question hung between them like a held breath. They'd been legally bonded for 6 months. Partners in every practical sense. They worked together, planned together, survived together. But they'd never discussed what happened when the war was over. When there was no enemy to fight. When they were just a man and a woman bound by legal fiction and shared trauma. "I don't know," Garrett admitted. "I hadn't thought past winning." "Maybe you should." She turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, you're not alone anymore. You know that, right?" He watched her go, disappearing into the sleeping quarters where her sisters rested. And for the first time in 18 years, Garrett Holloway considered the possibility that surviving might not be enough. That he might want to live. The exposure happened on a cold morning 3 weeks later. They'd chosen their journalist carefully. Independent, based in the core systems, with a reputation for stories that ended careers. He'd initially been skeptical, wary of frontier conspiracy theories. Then they'd sent him the data. The story broke across every major network simultaneously. Video testimony from Kaida and her sisters. Medical records proving DNA harvesting. Financial documents showing money flowing from guild accounts to government officials. And names. Dozens of names, hundreds. People who'd bought and sold human beings, who'd profited from murder and called it business. The galaxy convulsed. Garrett watched the feeds from the hauler, surrounded by the sisters, as their story spread like wildfire. News anchors struggling to process the scale, politicians scrambling to distance themselves, military commanders suddenly unavailable for comment. And Dravenvex arrested on camera as he stepped off his ship, still smiling, still confident that money would solve this like it solved everything else. He was wrong. The pressure was too great, too public, too many eyes watching for the usual channels of corruption to function. 3 days after the story broke, the guild's assets were frozen. A week later, formal charges. Murder, kidnapping, trafficking on a scale that made frontier salvagers look like children playing at crime. The contracts were voided, all of them. Thousands of people across the frontier woke up to discover they were free, including 5 sisters who'd spent their entire lives believing freedom was impossible. Ashara cried when the notification came through the legal document that said her debt was canceled, her contract void, her status changed from asset to citizen. They all cried. Even Garrett, who'd thought he'd run out of tears 18 years ago, felt heat behind his eyes as he watched them celebrate, watched them realize that the future was theirs now. Not owned, not obligated, just theirs. But the celebration was brief, because freedom came with a question none of them had prepared to answer. What now? The other sisters had family, distant relatives who'd been searching for them, clan connections that had never stopped looking. Invitations came through official channels. Offers of homecoming, of reunion, of lives waiting to be reclaimed. Ren left first, traveling to the inner colonies where her genetic line had originated. She hugged Garrett so hard his ribs ached, whispering thanks he didn't deserve. Liz found a place at an artist colony that didn't care where she'd come from, only what she could create. Even Nick, stubborn and angry and certain she'd never fit anywhere, found a home with a security firm that valued skills over history. One by one they left, until only Kaida and Ashara remained. Kaida because she had nowhere else to go. Her genetics were human, but she'd never met another human besides Garrett. The idea of finding Elena's family, of explaining what she was, terrified her more than staying in the hauler. And Ashara because she'd made a choice 6 months ago that still bound her legally, if not morally. The bond could be dissolved now. The debt was gone. The threat was neutralized. She could leave, start over, build a life that had nothing to do with a dying salvager who'd saved her from a cage. But she didn't. Garrett found her one evening standing at the viewport watching the sun set over whatever planet they'd landed on this week. They moved often now, restless, unsure where to settle. "Your sisters are doing well," he said, joining her. Ren sent another message. "She's learning to farm. Says the work reminds her of you, methodical and careful." "Good." Ashara's voice was distant. "That's good. You could join them, any of them, or find your own place. The bond can be dissolved. I won't contest it." "I know." "Then why are you still here?" She turned to face him, and he saw something in her expression he hadn't seen before. Not gratitude, not obligation, not even the strategic calculation that had defined their partnership. Something softer. Something that looked like choice. "Because I want to be," she said simply. "Because in 6 months of fighting beside you, I've learned who you are. Not the man who saved us. The man who teaches Kaida mathematics at midnight because she asked. Who checks on everyone's health even when he ignores his own. Who carries guilt for things that weren't his fault and refuses to forgive himself. That's not a reason to stay. It's exactly a reason to stay." She moved closer. "I'm not here because of what you did. I'm here because of who you are. And because when I imagine my future, you're in it." Garrett's breath caught. "Ashara, I'm 22 years older than you. I'm dying from a condition I can't afford to cure completely. I have nothing to offer except yourself. That's enough." She reached up, placed a hand against his cheek. "I spent my entire life being told my value was in what I could give others. You taught me that my value is in being myself. Let me give you the same gift. This isn't obligation. This is choice. The first real choice I've ever made." Her eyes held his. "I'm choosing you, Garrett Holloway. Not because I owe you. Because I want to." He felt something break inside him, some wall he'd built 18 years ago to keep grief in and hope out. "I don't deserve." "Neither did I. We're even." He kissed her, then gentle and uncertain, like someone who'd forgotten how. She kissed back, patient and present, teaching him that it was okay to want this, to want her, to want something for himself. When they pulled apart, both were shaking. "I'm afraid," he had admitted. "Of what?" "Of losing you, of history repeating, of caring about something again." "I'm afraid too," she said, "but I'm more afraid of waking up in 5 years and regretting that I didn't try." Kaida's voice came from the doorway. "Are you two finally done being stupid?" They turned to find her watching them, arms crossed, expression caught between amusement and exasperation. How long have you been standing there? Garrett asked. Long enough to realize you're both idiots. She moved into the room, dropped onto a storage crate. You love each other. It's obvious to everyone except you. Stop making it complicated. It is complicated, Garrett said. Only if you let it be. Kaida looked at Ashera. Do you want to be with him? Yes. Do you want to be with her? She asked Garrett. Yes. Then stop talking about age and health and deserving. Life is short. Love is rare. Take it when you find it. She stood headed for the door, then paused. Also, I'm staying too, just so you know. You're the closest thing I have to a father. I'm not losing that. She left them alone again. Garrett and Ashara looked at each other, something like wonder softening their features. She's right, Ashara said. Usually is. So what do? We stop running. We find a place to settle. We build something that lasts. He took her hand. Together. Together. They settled on a frontier colony called Haven's Edge. Small enough to be overlooked, established enough to have infrastructure. They bought land with the reward money from exposing the guild, built a clinic that served the scattered population. Garrett returned to medicine, treating injuries and illnesses with the skill he'd thought he'd buried. Ashura managed the administrative side, brought structure to chaos, made it work. Kaida enrolled in school learning alongside children who'd been born free, who'd never had to question their right to exist. It was simple. It was ordinary. It was everything Garrett had lost 18 years ago and thought he'd never have again. At night, he and Ashara would sit on the porch they'd built, watching stars emerge in alien skies, and talk about nothing and everything. She told him about her sisters, about the messages that came regularly, updates on lives being lived fully. He told her about Elena and Maya, about grief that was changing shape, becoming memory instead of wound. They were healing, slowly, together. 6 months after settling at Haven's Edge, Ashara woke Garrett before dawn. I have something to tell you, she said. He sat up immediately, alert, reading the tension in her voice. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. She took his hand, placed it on her stomach. I'm pregnant. The world stopped. You're sure, confirmed yesterday, about 8 weeks. Garrett felt something vast and terrifying and wonderful open inside his chest. We didn't plan, I know, but it happened anyway. She watched his face carefully. Is this okay? I know we never discussed. He kissed her, stopping the words, showing her what he couldn't quite say. When they pulled apart, both were crying. It's more than okay, he whispered. It's everything. You're going to be a father again. We're going to be parents. He pulled her close, felt her warmth, her realness, the impossible gift of a future he'd stopped believing in. A real family, one we chose. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Ashara glowed with health, her body thriving now that stress and fear were replaced with safety and peace. Garrett monitored everything obsessively, doctor and father-to-be warring for control. She tolerated his hovering with good humor. Kaida was ecstatic, planning nursery designs and studying childcare with the same focus she brought to everything. But as Ashara's belly grew, Garrett's health declined. The heart condition he'd been managing for years began to worsen. The medication that had held it at bay stopped working as effectively. He tired more easily, needed more rest, felt the weight of his years like never before. He tried to hide it, failed. Ashara found him one morning, collapsed in the clinic, face ashen, pulse erratic. She called for help, got him to the hospital, stood beside his bed, while doctors explained that his heart was failing faster than expected, that they could slow it, manage it, but not stop it, that he had maybe 5 years, maybe less. When they were alone, she held his hand and didn't say anything, didn't need to. Everything they needed to communicate was in the touch. I'm sorry, he said finally. For what? For not being able to give you more time, for leaving you with a child to raise alone. Stop. Her voice was firm. You've given me more than time. You've given me freedom, a family, love. That's worth everything. The baby will know their father, will grow up hearing stories about the man who fought an empire to protect people he didn't know, who chose kindness when cruelty would have been easier. She leaned close. You're not failing us, Garrett. You're giving us everything you have. He pulled her down into an embrace, feeling her warmth, feeling the movement of their child between them. I love you, he said. I should have said it before. I love you. I know, I love you too. They held each other as the sun rose outside, painting the room in shades of gold. Time became precious after that. Garrett poured himself into teaching. He trained Kaida in advanced medical procedures, walked her through surgeries, explained diagnostic techniques until she could recite them in her sleep. She absorbed everything with desperate focus, understanding that these lessons were inheritance. He taught Ashara about the clinic's operations, the network of contacts he'd built, how to keep their work going after he was gone. And he taught Elena, even though she was too young to understand. He held her while explaining the stars, read her medical texts like bedtime stories, showed her how to be gentle with people who were hurting. She wouldn't remember these moments, but he would carry them with him wherever he went next. 1 year after settling at Haven's Edge, Ashara gave birth to a daughter. They named her Elena Maya Holloway, a bridge between past and future, a promise that love could survive even death. Garrett held her in the delivery room, this tiny perfect being who shared his genetics in Ashara's determination and felt complete in a way he'd thought impossible. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Welcome to a world that's better than the one we found. We'll make sure it stays that way." The baby gripped his finger with surprising strength. Ashara watched from the bed, exhausted and radiant. "She has your eyes, your stubbornness. Good, she'll need it." Kaida burst into the room moments later, desperate to meet her new sister. She held Elena with practiced care, having spent months preparing for this exact moment. "She's perfect," Kaida breathed. "She is," Garrett agreed. They brought Elena home to a house filled with love and family and hope. The sisters visited when they could, meeting the baby, who represented everything they'd fought for. Nix held her with surprising gentleness. Liz drew pictures of a future where Elena grew up free. Ren, always practical, set up a trust fund for Elena's education, pooling resources from all the sisters. "Family takes care of family," she said simply. And they were family now, not by blood or manufacture, but by choice. The truest kind. Months passed. Elena grew, reaching milestones that filled Garrett with wonder. First smile, first laugh, the way she tracked movement with eyes that saw him as the most important person in the world. His health continued to decline, slowly but steadily. He needed help now with things he'd once taken for granted. Walking long distances, carrying heavy loads, sometimes just getting out of bed. But he didn't complain. He'd been given a gift, a second chance, a family when he'd thought he'd lost his only one forever. Every morning was a victory. On Elena's first birthday, the family gathered. All the sisters came home for the celebration, bringing partners and stories and the fullness of lives being lived freely. They ate together, laughed together, watched Elena destroy a cake with enthusiastic determination. And late that night, when the guests had left and Elena slept peacefully in her crib, Garrett sat on the porch with Ashara and Kaida, three people who'd found each other in darkness and built light. "I need to tell you something," Garrett said quietly. They both tensed. "The doctors say I have maybe a year, maybe less. The heart won't take much more." Silence fell like snow. Then Kaida spoke. "That's not fair." "No, but it's real." "What do you need from us?" Ashara asked, voice steady despite the tears on her face. "Just this, what we have now, time together. Making sure Elena knows she's loved. Making sure you both know you'll be okay without me." "We won't be okay," Kaida said fiercely. "You will, because you're stronger than you realize. Because you have each other." He looked at Ashara. "And because you've already survived worse than this." "That doesn't make it hurt less." "I know." They sat in silence, watching the stars, holding on to each other. Months passed. Garrett's strength faded, but his spirit remained fierce. He worked shorter hours, but made every minute count. Saw fewer patients, but gave each one his full attention. Quality over quantity, presence over time. One evening, 18 months after Elena's birth, Garrett collapsed in the clinic. No warning, no gradual decline, just sudden system failure. Ashara found him, called for help, held him while they waited for the transport that would take him to the hospital. One last time. "I'm not ready," she whispered. "Neither am I." His voice was weak but clear. "But we don't get to choose. I need more time with you. You have everything I can give, everything that matters." He touched her face. "Love them, teach them, show Elena what it means to choose kindness. That's how I stay alive." The transport arrived. At the hospital, doctors confirmed what they all knew. His heart was failing. Hours, maybe a day. They moved him to a private room, gathered the family. All the sisters came, brought their families, filled the room with the sound of life continuing despite death's approach. Garrett lay in the bed, surrounded by people he'd saved and people who'd saved him back, and felt at peace. Kaida held his hand on one side, Ashara on the other, Elena sleeping in her arms. "Thank you," he told them all, "for letting me be part of this, for giving me a reason to stop running." "You gave us freedom," Nick said. "You gave us family," Ren added. "You gave us ourselves." Ashara finished. Then we're even. He looked at Kata. You're going to be a brilliant doctor, better than I ever was. Because you taught me. Because you chose to learn. He shifted his gaze to Ashara. Take care of them. All of them. I will, I promise. And remember, what we built wasn't about me. It was about all of us. Keep building. She nodded, unable to speak past the tears. Garrett looked at baby Elena sleeping peacefully through the end of his world. My daughter's DNA created you as slaves, he whispered. I helped raise you as free. That's the difference. That's everything. His eyes closed. The monitors beeped steadily, then irregularly, then not at all. Garrett Holloway died surrounded by love, having transformed loss into legacy and grief into grace. He died free. 5 years later, Elena Holloway sat in the clinic's garden, reading medical texts while her mother worked inside, and her sister, Kaida, taught a class of new students. She didn't remember her father. Not really. Just warmth. Safety. A voice that made her feel protected. But she knew him in the stories her mother told, in the techniques Kaida taught, in the way their family gathered every year bringing children to meet the girl whose father had saved them all. She knew him in the clinic's carved stone entrance. No one pays with their body to live. No one is property. Everyone deserves choice. Legacy, she was learning, wasn't about being remembered. It was about the lives you touched, continuing to touch others, spreading outward like ripples on water. Her father had thrown one stone into dark waters. The waves were still spreading. Elena closed her book and went inside to help her mother. She had work to do, a legacy to honor, and a galaxy to heal one person at a time, the way her father had taught them, the only way that mattered.